We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. Great to have you with us. Today, we're streaming live on a Monday morning, 10:30 a.m. here on the East Coast, and we're streaming to Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, Facebook. If anyone's out there on Facebook, I'm not sure. But great to have you with us streaming live or listening to the audio edition, which comes out also today on Monday, August 11th. Excited for today's show. I'll introduce my guest in just one moment. Before I do, I want to remind you about Fox & Sons Coffee, which I'm sipping on a cold brew right now from Fox & Sons, my favorite coffee. I drink it every single day. And you can save 15% off an order of $40 or more at Fox & Sons Coffee by going to FoxN, it's the letter N, sons.com, putting in promo code John, John, and you'll save 15% off an order of $40 or more. So please do support a like-minded entrepreneur, Stephen Fox, with his business, Fox & Sons Coffee. All right, guys, let's get into today's show. Excited to bring back a returning guest, Jeffrey Tucker. Jeffrey's been on my show, I think, 4, maybe 5 times, quite a few. And I recently reached out to Jeffrey as I was reflecting upon passing the 500 episode milestone. And, Jeffrey, as he's been doing, he's been working and writing. He writes for Epoch Times. He runs the Brownstone Institute. And he said, I've got some things we need to talk about with regards to the administrative state. So, of course, I wanted to bring Jeffrey on to talk about that. Welcome back to Finding Freedom, Jeffrey.
That's nice to be here. Thank you so much. I also have a new book out I'm really excited about. It's called Spirits of America. It's supposed to celebrate American habits, mores, traditions on the occasion of the 250th anniversary of the founding. And so it's only 132 pages, and it has 15 chapters. Each chapter is illustrated with a pen and ink drawing that's very nostalgic. I've never written anything like this before. It's what I consider my sort of post-lockdown reflection on fundamentals of freedom.
That's very interesting. So that was that's what gave you the motivation, was coming out of lockdown.
Yeah. So I think, to understand what happened to us during lockdown, we need to understand first of all, it wasn't an accident. It was all quite systematic, and there's an unfolding of a very strange worldview, a technocratic worldview driven by the industrial desire to get us to accept a new product with a new technology called mRNA, which had been in development for some 30 years. And the idea is that they're going to have messenger RNA implanted inside lipid nanoparticles that are be injected to your skin, creating a spike protein for whatever your malady happens to be. They couldn't get it through the FDA for decades and decades, but under emergency use authorization, they're able to bypass all the normal standards of efficacy and safety just to kind of break the taboo. People didn't want it, so they mandated it, and they got pretty severe with vaccine passports in 5 major cities, during which time they just said, hunker down, consume digital media, don't go to church, don't hang out with your friends, don't have house parties. You can go to big business, not small. And just let the government run everything. Government and industry run everything, and the media echoed everything behind them. So there was a worldview behind this, and I think it's correctly called a Great Reset. And the whole reset was to detach ourselves from the physical world, from our social networks, from our friend networks, and from old technologies and old values. And so coming out of this, and of course the whole thing was a catastrophic flop that resulted in unprecedented injury and death, and massive disorientation, and the ill education of an entire generation, and the addiction, substance abuse addiction on the part of the population, from alcoholism to psych drugs, is what we're left with. So my book is short, and it's just a simple attempt to recapture simply like what real life feels like, and as a matter of resistance to the technocratic state.
Yeah, I think that's important, and it's something I've been talking about recently with people around my age. I'm 42 years old and grew up in the 80s and 90s, and just kind of reminiscing about what childhood used to be like for
Mhm.
kids, and how different it is today. So, I think it's important for people who remember those times, those of us who, past the age of 40, to kind of help to encourage the younger generations that it didn't always used to be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way going forward. So really excited to read that book and see what you think.
Yeah, it's the strange thing about it is I reflect back on my own. So my first time to write about pandemic planning was 2005, and I knew the lockdown plans were in place. I didn't really believe they would ever actually do it, but I knew that there were certain people in government and industry that believed that they could do it. So in January 2020, I saw all the things coming into place where they might pull it off, but they had tried to do this before in 2009, 2005, and 2006, and even all the way back to 2002 and 3, even all the way back to the anthrax scares after 9/11. So I wondered if this would be the time, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened, which was, the complete deletion of the Bill of Rights, and the empowerment of a technocratic elite that decided if you were essential or non-essential, if we could celebrate Christmas or not. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, all these fake experts telling us how many people could go into the grocery store at the same time, and then having to follow arrows on the floor.
Crazy.
Yeah, and plexiglass everywhere, and germophobia just seized the population like never before. And it took me a long time to figure out what was really going on. We came out with the Great Barrington Declaration in October of 2020, and there was hysteria about it. It was a hit from the top. They said, we got to take this document down and destroy it. And then all the kept media journals went after it, from Wired to Mother Jones to, New York Times, you name it. And I couldn't really understand why, because the document wasn't particularly radical. It just said, look, this is this is a kind of respiratory virus. We're going to get through it. You can't really vaccinate your way out of this. It'll sweep through and go away. If you're old and infirm, we can understand why you would want to, stay out of harm's way for a little while. But endemicity will come through exposure and natural immunity. And that's what the document said. And it was just, everybody was freaking out about this, like it was the end of the world for these guys to say something very normal and very plain. What I had not understood, and it took me 2 years to figure this out, the problem was that they were about to release the shot, within the next month. They had the shot already, but they wanted to delay it until Trump was out of office, so he couldn't get credit for it. So they had every plan to distribute this thing and start distributing it in the second week of November after Trump lost, which I don't really believe he lost, but
Neither do I.
Yeah, mail-in ballots and so on that were authorized all the way from March 2020. The CDC is the one that authorized all the mail-in ballots, nobody else. I mean, like, we didn't know the Center for Disease Control was in charge of our elections, but they were. And so they wanted to panic the population to accept shots. And that's why we stayed locked down. Now, were some people under the impression that the shot would really end the wave of infection? Maybe. But
I think at the beginning, yes. I think at the beginning for sure. Some people were.
some people believed it, but it was also kind of a long shot because this technology had never been tried before, mRNA technology, and they didn't know what the effects were going to be. If it, one thing, it creates a spike protein in your blood, right? It recreates the coronavirus or the COVID spike protein. As a way of triggering an immune response. But the problem is that nobody really figured out how to create an off button on the technology. So it just kind of creates and recreates and recreates forever,
Yeah.
and spreads to all parts of the body. So when the injuries started coming along very quickly, really in the spring, I mean, there are a number of things that happened. One is they quickly realized it wasn't going to protect anybody, like from the infection itself. And the reason for that is that COVID is an unstable virus. It's not like polio or measles or chickenpox or smallpox. It was a mutating virus. So the creation of spike protein just sort of triggered this very intelligent virus to mutate around the inoculation. So that's why suddenly the mutation started occurring, and so it couldn't stop against it incentivized the mutations, and then so of course it couldn't stop against infection and transmission, which meant that everybody was going to get it anyway. And then gradually data folded in. It turned out that people who got shot were more susceptible than those who did not. And the reason for that is really obvious, because if you had natural immunity, it's going to be more broad and more efficacious for you than any artificial immunity created by the spike protein, by the artificial creation of the spike protein. And so the people who got the vaccination actually fared worse than those who did not. So they started panicking already in the spring and summer of 2021. And, why panic? Well, they had risked everything to make this shot work for the population, like everything. The public credibility of mRNA technology, which had already a huge industry behind it. They loved mRNA because you can print it up very quickly. You can get everybody on a subscription model of immunity. It kind of had to work, and it didn't work. And then people wondered, well, listen, if the major media, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, HHS, and all the state and local health agencies were demanding I get the shot that turns out to be not only not work, but also be dangerous for me, what else are they lying about? So that's sort of where we are today. And you're seeing new polls where people are doubting, not just the COVID response, but the whole of public health and medicine and media and academia, and all the commanding heights of society are suddenly in disrepute. And we're in this in-between stage right now where all these things are collapsed. I mean, the think tanks, all the old institutions are sort of melted already, and none of their hectoring and lecturing and shouting studies at you is making any difference. People just don't believe anymore. So the old world, in many ways, they collapsed it. Among the things they destroyed was public schooling, which is one of the weirdest things. It was like the greatest achievement of progressivism. Was public schools. I mean, let's just say the most long-lasting and the least questioned. And by keeping kids out of school for a year or two, parents discovered they could educate their kids at home. They found other options. They began to look through the curriculum that they were being taught at school and say, "What the hell is this? This is evil."
And they got to see a side of it from remote learning. Like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening at school, and you see.
Yeah.
Potentially a teacher that has no control of a classroom.
No control of the class. And then they knew it wasn't good for the kids. So why were all the experts continue to claim that schools need to be shut? So, this was a catastrophe for the public schools. And now you're seeing school choice programs go through. Everybody's bailing from them. There's Arizona shut like 30 major public schools in the last 10 months because they can't recruit teachers, and there are no students left. I mean, so this is where we are as a nation, in this sort of collapse of all official things, and this clamor to return to more fundamental foundational things. Essentially asking the question, what is true? How can I get my rights back? How can I exercise my freedoms? What am I going to do with my freedoms? This is sort of where we are, and why Trump is having so much success, just disrupting everything and anything, and people are just laughing.
Yeah, it's an absolutely crazy time right now. And it just imagining, the younger generations growing up right now in this chaos, and like you said, they're really seeking truth, trying to understand like what is true as they watch these institutions kind of collapse around them, and rather than growing up through the public school system and being indoctrinated with having respect for the experts at the FDA and HHS and all of these different institutions, it's kind of the emperor has no clothes, and they're seeing it for what it is. So like when we turn, and I mean, we were going to talk about the administrative state, which I think we are. The administrative state, that's where COVID came from, right? That's
and I think this is an extremely important topic, especially for libertarians, because libertarians have this broad view that the state as such is sort of an institution of embedded malice that overall does not contribute to the well-being of society. I mean, that's sort of in broad terms. So that's sort of what we believe. But it's a question of what is the state, and there's many ways to think of what the state is. And I think traditionally, people have thought of the state as some melange of combination of politicians and bureaucrats. And we use those terms interchangeably, politicians, bureaucrats, Well, it turns out the politicians had almost no role at all in COVID. They couldn't even get a hearing. They were never asked for their opinions. There was no legislation. There's nothing they could really do to stop it. They just sort of rubber stamped the spending through a great deal of blackmail and fear drove that. So that the politicians really aren't the state. And the president we think of as being the head of the executive department, but actually that's not really true either, because they've never, until very recently, until the Supreme Court recently said this, they've never really been in a position to hire and fire from the permanent civil service, much less control the intelligence agencies. They've never really tried. I'm not sure anybody's really attempted anything like a serious control of the administrative apparatus of the state ever. I mean, it was created in American history for the very first time in 1883, and then it got worse through World War I and the New Deal and World War II, and then after the Kennedy assassination, essentially the intelligence services was running everything. So you have these many layers. So you have the political layer. Then you have the civil service, the sort of civilian bureaucracies, but then you have a much deeper layer, which I think is rightly called the deep state, consisting of the classified world of secrets and intelligence. And they're working very tightly. This is the other aspect of the state that has been revealed to us. They work very tightly with corporate finance, media, and the biggest corporations. And that's why they all cooperated so much during COVID. They all had one line, stay home, stay safe, get your injection, put on a mask. And there was no question. It was mass censorship, and everybody cooperated with it, from Mark Zuckerberg all the way to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and all the banks, that started debanking political dissidents. They all worked together. And it's incredible to think about like how far reaching this thing we call the state is. When I finally got COVID, which was, I think, January of 2022, my doctor prescribed me ivermectin
I took it too.
and a few other things. Well, I tried to get ivermectin. Well, I said to my doctor, I said, well, I'll just, send my prescription over to CVS. He goes, and he said to me, they're part of the system. I can't do that. And I said, the system? What system? That's just a store. Not part of the system. It's just a store. He said, like, you have a lot to learn, Tucker. Indeed, I did. So I picked a small family pharmacy because I thought, well, my doctor's a lunatic. So I picked a small family pharmacy, went over there and gave him the prescription. And the girl behind the counter, behind plexiglass at this point, turned around to her boss and said, ivermectin, are we doing that? And she goes, sorry. I said, what do you mean, sorry? This is a normal, I've got a prescription. You have it and you won't let me have it? Why not? Sorry, that's it. It shooed me away. Well, I eventually got it through gray markets. And it turned out that people at the FDA were also getting their ivermectin through gray markets because they couldn't get it any other way. So it was for a major swath of the country, but not in there were some areas of the country, like I think Texas and a few, Florida and New Mexico or something like that you could sort of still get it.
I think Arkansas, you can actually now get ivermectin over the counter.
Yeah, they're putting it over the counter, but in major coastal areas, particularly blue states, ivermectin was unavailable. So they took it off the market to make room for the mRNA shots. I mean, they wanted everything gone except mRNA injections, which they wanted 90% of the population injected with mRNA and no other options. And I mean, that is a sadistic state. The crucial thing that happened here is that we were under quasi-martial law by the administrative state in cooperation with all of its industries that work daily with the administrative apparatus to sort of take away our freedom. And that is a really rich and sophisticated understanding of what we call the state that is very difficult to piece together, say 10 years ago. I mean, maybe some people got it, maybe, but I think even my friend and mentor, Murray Rothbard, started getting glimpses of it, but he could not have possibly understood the full extent of it. Its reach into the private sector, the cooperation of the administrative state apparatus with private industry is so close that it's hard to tell which is the hand and which is the glove, So, so these neat distinctions between public sector and private sector that libertarianism has always posited work great in theory, but in reality, it really is. There is such a thing as a ruling class, and the ruling class is permanent bureaucrats, major corporations, large banks, retail outlets, pharmaceutical companies, and that's how they touch our lives. And the deep state works very closely with all these retail forms, what I call the shallow state, bypassing entirely the elected representatives. So when we go to vote, we're mostly just voting for marionettes. I mean, we've sort of figured that out, for the most part, that's been true. I'm not sure that's going to be true so much in the future because what we see happening with Trump, and he has plenty of policies with which I disagree, blah, blah, blah. We can argue about that during cocktail parties. But the disruption here is that a man elected by the people is actually taking charge and gradually sweeping aside the old legacy institutions, personnel, industries, and interests that have ruled Washington for decades and decades and decades. Like, it's a little bit like if you move into a house and there's poison ivy everywhere. I mean, you can chop leaves here, chop leaves there, and you can do this, every day for forever. But until you find the root, you're never going to get rid of the poison ivy, and it's going to take you a long time to find it. When you find it, you're going to dig it up, and it's going to be massive, and it could be, a quarter mile away. You don't actually know. It could be anywhere, but you have to keep searching it. That seems to be what the second term of Trump is all about, is trying to find the roots of the corruption. And they keep marching through these institutions. It's actually entertaining to watch, to see him go, all right, who screwed me over last time? And he's on this kind of unrelenting hunt, and he's marching through all the institutions, whether it's the FDA or the CDC, or the BLS, or one after another, and it's a delight to watch it happening.
It is. It's something we've certainly never seen before. So when we talk about this administrative state, it's like an octopus, right? With its tentacles reaching in, and it's interwoven with corporations, as you said. When we look at finding that root, finding the head of the snake, where are the orders coming from? Who came up with this scheme for COVID? I'm not saying it's one person, but
yeah.
How do these ideas become launched and then executed into action, that you have something like COVID and a vaccine that follows it?
There was a lot of diversions in the early days of trying to figure this out. We thought that maybe public health had gotten confused, that the way to deal with the respiratory virus is to hide under your sofa, which is ridiculous. I mean, obviously you can't do that. Every virus that's ever existed will always exist. You can't, absent, some cases like smallpox that are actually eradicated, all other viruses still exist. And eradication is very difficult to do and very rare for precise reasons. So I just thought for a long time that they had just kind of gone haywire, that there had been a combination of confusion, sort of Cootie's theory of viruses, stay away from me and I won't get it, combined with sort of the abuse of power. But as time went on, I realized that public health wasn't not really in a decision-making role during the entire period from 2020 all the way, I'm going to say, to 2023, but even later. The controlling forces was not, in fact, the FDA and the CDC and the NIH and so on, and it wasn't even Fauci as such. It was a sort of a biomilitary intelligence wing that was trying to that had become an industry, really a global industry, that was rooted in the idea of chemical warfare. So fear of chemical warfare. We need labs to create viruses so that we can also then quickly generate the inoculation to stop them, so we can kill the enemies because they don't have the magic shot. We have it. So it's all science fiction. But this industry had gotten so huge and so embedded in the national security apparatus. That's why on March 13th, 2020, when the initial lockdowns were put into place, unbeknownst to the public, the rulemaking authority was vested with the National Security Council, not with the CDC, but with the National Security Council, which then transferred a week later that rulemaking authority over to FEMA. So it was a kind of military martial law. The military, in this case, was the biomedical industry, the shot makers, pharmaceutical companies, and these sort of labs around the world that were experimenting with chemical warfare agents. And COVID sort of exposed all that. So if you think about it that way, you can understand what really unfolded. There are some very strange things that happened. For example, the FDA kept being sort of having its arm twisted to approve these shots, which they had rejected for decades prior, but suddenly were sailing through. And they were told to take responsibility for them, but they weren't really given discretion over whether they were approved or not. They were being approved by the military, but the FDA was used as sort of a front group, which is why in 2021, when the boosters started coming out, the top two vaccine virologists working at the FDA just flat out resigned. They said, we don't want any part of this, really. And everybody who left the FDA was willing to play along with the game. They didn't like the game, but they played along. And the CDC was mostly at this point remote. They had very little to do with anything, glad to take a paycheck, but not really in a decision-making authority. So the decision-making power was entirely military, which worked in cooperation. Yeah. And so if you think about it this way, what really happened in March 2020 was a kind of military coup d'etat against Trump. And he recognized, it's true that he approved the lockdowns after having resisted for a long time. He said, okay, fine, lockdown. Well, that was the end of his presidency. It was over by essentially.
Well, I think the last time we spoke, you shared a story about how Tucker Carlson was involved in convincing Trump to lock
that
down.
was something like March 8th. And certainly, and March 8th was an interesting day because Trump is still tweeting out that we're going to get through this through natural immunity. March 10th comes around. He said, we're going to use all the powers of government to do with the coronavirus. So something happened between March 8th and March 10th to flip him. It could be a very simple matter, and people, and I believe simple explanations. It makes sense. People came to him and said, listen, you have to do this. This is going to happen anyway. So you might as well get in front of it. We'll get the inoculation out and fantastically fast, probably by the summer. So if you approve these lockdowns, that will allow you to not be responsible for the millions of people who are going to die. And you can say, well, we did everything we could. If you don't do that, you're going to have blood on your hands. And then we're going to get the shot out and you're going to be a hero. I think that was his initial thinking. After about 2 weeks, they came back to him and asked him for another 30 days of lockdown. He approved it. But at some uncertain point in the weeks following that, he began to believe that he had been tricked again, that this was basically a follow-up on Russiagate, just yet another plot. But by then it was too late. So he wasn't really president anymore. He wasn't in a position to decide anything, which is why he was tweeting out madly and going out on the campaign trail. And then, of course, we had the great summer of protest, where
summer of love.
Yeah, where we went from like stay home and stay safe to get out and protest racism. Okay, because the ruling class knew for sure that young people in particular needed some out for their anger. They can't just sit on their beds all the time scrolling TikTok. So, okay, get out in the streets and protest racism. That will help form your political values properly. And so after that, then the fire started, and Trump started getting really angry. What the hell? Why are American cities burning? I mean, why is this all happening? Well, at some point, the authorities said, okay, now you got to go back home again, stay indoors because we got to prepare for the election. So we send in your mail-in ballots. And during that time, I remember I was flying around the country. Everywhere I would land, I get Facebook texting me saying, download your Colorado ballot, download your Tennessee ballot, download your North Carolina ballot. I could have voted. I could have voted 10 times. I mean, it was the most insecure election in history and completely stolen from Trump. But Trump wasn't really president. The brilliant thing about his having been declared the loser of that election is that he was able to get all of his people to go into kind of a sanctuary for 4 years and plot their return. And they had dozens, if not hundreds, of people scheming for re-election. And they got all the red states to lock down their ballots. They were monitoring everything really closely. Of course, he won in the landslide, which is what would have happened in 2020 if it had been a fair election. And then it was the most hilarious transition, or the most brilliant transition imaginable. He stayed up very late, not a drinker. He doesn't get tired. So he's up to 2, 3 a.m. at military balls, still cutting cakes and dancing and everything. Meanwhile, all of his peeps were sweeping through the bureaucracies, breaking down doors, getting into locked rooms, going to the Department of Treasury, taking possession of the finances, really just letting Washington know what was going. And then they passed, in short order, something like 140 different executive orders, many of which he knew for sure were going to be challenged by the courts. But he also took a real risk that if they go to the Supreme Court, that we've got the votes to side with the elected president over the administrative state, that they would essentially rally around Article 2, Section 1, which is that the elected president is head of the executive branch, right? The words can't be plainer. The Supreme Court affirmed that. And so mostly he's been given a free hand now. So it was all brilliant to watch. And the story is a spectacular, almost, like great science fiction, the way it all unfolded. It was brilliant. Again, I'm not an apologist for everything that Trump is doing, but I mean, there's no question that we had to do something to put the people back in charge of the government, or else there's absolutely no hope whatsoever for any chance for human liberty in our lifetimes. Yeah. So now I think liberty's been given another chance.
Well, what are your thoughts on the Epstein files? And what's happened with them?
I keep running into more and more little bits of information that ties them to essentially everything. So I don't know. I mean, I'm like you in the position of just being a reader. I don't have any inside information. I mean, you have this line, that the entire ruling class is being blackmailed. With compromising pictures and that sort of thing. I will say this, my limited knowledge of the court system and everything that's associated with it is that it's very difficult to get information out. There's so many NDAs and sealed documents, especially when it comes to Epstein. It's very difficult to declassify classified information. So I'm not surprised that we're not really getting information. I think Trump probably wants it.
I guess the confusing part for me is what Trump has said publicly about it.
Yeah,
and maybe it's a distract. Maybe he's trying to distract by saying just forget about it, and maybe they're working in the background. Who knows? I'm not really one of those people who thinks that Trump necessarily is playing 5D underwater backgammon.
But you don't even have to believe the strategy is all that clever. One of the things they've learned, and they troll the left all the time, whatever Trump's for, the opposition is against, and whatever Trump is against, the opposition becomes for. So if you wanted the opposition to call for the release of the Epstein documents, the best strategy you could ever do is say, don't release the Epstein documents. This is all a big distraction and stupid. And sure enough, that worked, right? So now you've got everybody on the left demanding the release of the Epstein documents. So maybe that's not exactly 5D chess. That's just like chess.
Maybe. Yeah. But I mean, something that got me thinking as you were talking about, the real control of the state is this bureaucracy, this administrative state, the deep state. The politicians are just figureheads. And with the Epstein files, the public sort of has this, we have this thinking that these politicians are the ones that have been blackmailed and compromised.
Right.
Maybe it's partially just a distraction, just to get us to think that as the administrative state and deep state continue to do their thing, and we're focused on Russiagate and the Epstein files and all these different things.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Certainly, even if Epstein didn't exist, there would be vast problems. Everything would have happened just the way it happened. So, in that sense, maybe Trump is right. It's not the most important thing. I don't really know. It certainly is an intriguing one. And the fact that nobody believes the official story is symptomatic of our times. I mean, like these days, hardly anyone believes anything coming from Washington. In fact, if you find somebody who believes, whatever the line of the day is, that person is an idiot, and you know it. An idiot or on the payroll.
Yeah, probably both in
Yeah,
in that case. But
probably both.
so we got a few more minutes here. So tariffs. I know that in libertarian circles, there's so many libertarians that will just, when you mention the word tariff, they go into a rant against how it's another tax and X, Y, and Z. And of course it is. We all know that. We all know tariffs are another tax. But do you think Trump has used tariffs in a way that could be beneficial in trade wars and protecting the United States and bringing things like manufacturing back to the United States?
To answer that question, really, you have to step back and ask a more foundational question, which is there a problem that needs to be solved? And here you get disagreements. You've got plenty of people out there, particularly the free traders, who say there was absolutely nothing wrong, nothing that needed to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with trade deficits. George Will was saying that yesterday on Bill Maher. Nothing wrong with trade deficit. Manufacturing was in fine shape. There's nothing wrong with other countries building all the things we used to make. Just chill out. Well, I don't really accept that view. And maybe it's because I'm in New England and I can just drive around and see empty factories all over the place and demoralized populations and people without any skills and a third of the population working in bullshit jobs. I mean, it's just there's something profoundly wrong. And in order to find out what that is, I did a really deep dive in the history of free trade theory. And one of my mentors is Gottfried Habler. He was an architect of GATT. And what he said, what everybody has said from David Hume all the way to Gottfried Habler, including David Ricardo in the 19th century, is that free trade is not really about absolute advantages of one country forever over another country. That if you have a well-constructed system, then you're gonna compete based on comparative advantage, and that there will be a long-run a tendency towards a single price. So you would not have a situation, for example, where everything that's made in the U.S. could be produced at 1/10,000th the price in China. I mean, that's not a sustainable situation, especially since it just lasts and lasts and lasts. And this situation comes about because of U.S. dollar dominance and the infinite demand for dollars overseas, especially in use by central banks as an asset on which they can blow up their competitive industries to wipe out U.S. products. So I think what Trump's insight was that this is an unworkable system, and it's gutting American productivity. Okay, so, and that's where I depart from my free trade friends. Like, I actually believe that there was a problem. There was and is a problem to solve. I can think of better ways to solve it than tariffs. At best, tariffs are going to be a Band-Aid situation. I understand where they're coming from. I'm not just one of these people that says this is all just hullabaloo, baloney, mercantilist thinking. I actually think that you can make an argument for what Trump is doing. Maybe the argument doesn't in the end work, but I don't believe that the U.S. can continue on the trajectory it was on 5 years ago, which is forever outsourcing everything. And then the U.S. has left, as a nation, the only thing we have left is natural resources, namely oil, debt, financialization, and professional services. I mean, that is not, this was the world's greatest manufacturing nation. To have all that completely wiped out and outsourced with no bounce back in the other direction is an unnatural and not a free market system. So I think Trump deserves some congratulation for seeing the problem. I don't think the solution is the right one, but I'm glad to see at least some attempts to address the problem.
Yeah, it's a complicated problem, and I think as libertarians sometimes we we see these things and we think, well, all we need to do is just break down all the barriers, end the income tax, end the Federal Reserve, and then everything will just be perfect.
Yeah, this
No.
is I don't know. It's like a very crude form of libertarianism
Mm-hmm.
to not understand the industries. I'll just give you an example. During COVID,
Yeah.
I had many libertarians say, "There's nothing wrong with shop mandates. If a company wants to impose them on their
Right.
employees, that's great." Well, except that the companies
Mm-hmm.
were entirely indemnified against all harms. Okay, so what in what world does the free market allow your boss to impose upon you by force dangerous things that can kill you? I mean, that is not a free market at work. So I think it's really incumbent upon libertarians to dig below their sloganeering and to really understand the industries and the problems they're trying to address, because invariably they're more complicated than merely, oh, laissez-faire, let private companies do whatever they want, eliminate all barriers. Usually the situation is a little more complicated than that, and we owe it to ourselves as libertarians, so we are not discredited in the public eye, to get serious, do the research. And that's a lot of what we do at Brownstone, is get serious and do the research.
Yeah. So I mean, as you said, Brownstone, you write for the Epoch Times as well.
Yeah.
So you provide places where people can go to dig beneath the sloganeering. So tell people about that and where they can find the rest of your work.
Yeah, brownstone.org is thriving. Every conference we have is like selling out incredibly. We've got supper clubs around the country and they're all packed. We have to turn people away. We've got a big conference at a farm in Virginia coming up next month. I've got that holds 400. I have a waiting list of 100 trying to get in. Yeah, so it's fun, and we're more and more digging further into the pharmacology towards the kind of the poisoning of the American body and the mind is our major beat. So coming out of COVID, I think that becomes a really important piece of the puzzle here. And then I'm also honored to, Epoch Times is the fourth largest newspaper. It's about to overtake the third largest newspaper, which is Los Angeles Times. Wow. In circulation. I write for them every single day. So that's a nice job to have.
Yeah, that'll keep you busy.
Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming back on the show. You've always been, so generous with your time, and my audience and I appreciate that. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye now. All right. That wraps up today's show of Finding Freedom. And there's one announcement before I let you go on your way and start your Monday here. I want to remind you that every other Friday, we have an episode of Politics. That's our new podcast. That's Politics, spelled with a tick at the end, a tick being a blood-sucking insect. So that show, it's myself, Brian McWilliams, Lou Perez, Brian Nichols, and we're breaking down much of what Jeffrey and I talked about today. The slithering snake, the administrative state, the slithering slimy politicians in DC, and doing it in a fun way that'll keep you entertained. So please, you can go ahead and subscribe. We have a separate feed for the Politics podcast. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, we have it, at least for now, in the Lions of Liberty feed. So you will get it if you are subscribed to the Lions of Liberty Network. But to really help the show and launch it and to start to generate some momentum, I really would appreciate it if you could go subscribe to that standalone Politics feed. Even better, if you could leave us a nice rating, 5-star rating, nice review. I know on Spotify now, if you listen or watch on Spotify, you can leave comments. Comments on any of our podcasts here on Lions of Liberty would be greatly appreciated on Spotify. All right. Well, it's been another awesome show, and I'll be back next week with another great guest. In the meantime, always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning